In this concept video, we're going to look at inverses of trig functions. The inverse is not the reciprocal. It is taking the ratio and finding the angle that goes with it. So it is not the same thing as a ratio. It is finding the angle from the ratio that we're given. So if we have something like on the right where we have 1/2 in root 3 over 2 and 1/2 in negative root 3 over 2, they can give us the same angle as far as reference angle, but because of the signs, we know that they're either positive or negative, or they're bigger than 1, and sometimes we have to make a decision. So we have some rules for that. If we have a sine, and we are trying to find the angle, it's between negative pi over 2 and pi over 2, so it's between negative 90 and 90. If we have cosine, it's between 0 and pi, so between 0 and 180, and tangent is between negative pi over 2 and pi over 2, which is between negative 90 and 90. That way we don't have two angles that are possible. So let's go ahead and look at the next slide. Here we have a table of what we're looking for, and let's go ahead and take a look at number 1. And let's leave this up for a second. All right, if we have cosine, the inverse, where it's negative root 3 over 2, so either using the unit circle, using what we know about special triangles, or using your hand trig. If I look at cosine of root 3 over 2, I know that is a 30-degree angle, so I know it's 30. And if I look up here at cosine, cosine has to be between 0 and 180, and since it's a negative value, I know that it's not between 0 and 90. So if I look at 30 as the reference angle, I'm going to go ahead and go to 180, and if it's a reference angle, I'm actually looking at 150 degrees. And then if I look at 5 pi, I'm looking at 30 degrees, so 180 divided by 30, I get 6. So as far as ratios or radians and degrees, I have a 150-degree angle and 5 pi over 6 for radians. Go ahead, pause the video, and try number 2. For number 2, I know that the sine is 1/2, so using whatever method you need, I'm going to use my hand. So I'm going to find sine is 1/2, that's always the second number. So I'm going to look for, if I put down my pointer finger, I have sine is 1/2 because my thumb is still left, and it's negative. So I know it's not between 0 and 90. If I look up here at sine, it's between negative 90 and 90. So I know it's got to go on the negative side because I have negative 1/2. So if I have an angle that's 30 and it's on the negative side, so I have negative 30, and then that as a angle in radians is negative pi over 6 because 180 divided by 30 is 6. Go ahead and do number 3 for homework, and we'll take a look at number 4. Number 4, we have the inverse cosine. What I want you to do is change that to tangent. Let's cross it out, and this is the inverse tangent of negative root 3. So if I'm looking at tangent, it's sine over cosine. So I can either have for root 3, I know that's got to be in the 30 or the 60. So I could either have, if I have a 30, the opposite is 1/2 divided by my adjacent, which is through 3 over 2. And if I flip and multiply, I have 2 over root 3, and that cancels out. But root 3 is on the bottom, so I know it's not 30, so let's try 60. So if I look at 60, the sine is root 3 over 2 over cosine, which is 1/2. And if I flip and multiply, times 2 over 1, I get root 3. So I know that it's got to be a 60-degree angle. And if I take a look up here, I'm looking at tangent. The tangent has to be between negative 90 and 90. So if it's a 60-degree angle and it has to be negative, and we know that this is negative 60 degrees. And a 60 goes into 183 times, so I know it's over 3. And 60 is 1 pi over 3 negative. Go ahead and try number 5 and come back and check. For number 5, if I look at cosine, the inverse cosine of 0, so that means that the first part of my hand, if I'm using the hand method, is going to be 0. So if I put down my pinky, that makes it 0, so that means I have a 90-degree angle. I go back up here, I'm looking at cosine. cosine has to be between 0 and 180, so I know that I can have a 90. So we'll go back down here. And this is either a 90-degree angle or, in terms of radians, pi over 2. Go ahead and do number 6 for homework. And problem A, we want to solve. So we have a painter needs to lean a 30-foot ladder against a wall. So here we go. We have a 30-foot ladder. Here's the wall. And safety recommends that the distance between the base of the ladder and the wall, so between here and here, is 1/4 of the length of the ladder. Well, we know the ladder is 30, and we know we need to take 1/4 of that based on the 1/4 of the ladder length. To the nearest degree, what acute angle should the ladder make with the ground? So I want this angle. So I know if I have adjacent and hypotenuse, I know that's my cosine of theta equals my adjacent, which is 30 over 4, over 30. If I make 30 a fraction, then I have 30 over 4 times, and I flip this 1 over 30, cancel them out. So I get 1/4. So really my cosine of theta is equal to 1 over 4. And if I take the inverse, so cosine inverse of 1/4 equals my angle. So if I flip it over, say what's the inverse, I'm given the ratio, what's the cosine? If I go ahead and use my second cosine button on my calculator, I can find the inverse and find the angle. So inverse cosine button of 1/4, and it actually gives me 75.5, so I'm going to say 76 degrees. Go ahead and try B for homework.